Hi, this is Welcome to Self, and I'm your host, Dr. Hayley Quinn, fellow human, ADHDer, business owner, and the anti-burnout business coach. I'm here for service-based business owners and entrepreneurs like you to help you increase your own self-care and self-compassion, change the relationship you have with yourself and your business, and help you elevate your business to a new level so you can live the full and meaningful life you desire. We are all on a continual learning journey, so let's learn together. Welcome to Self is a place where you can come and learn about the practices that will assist you as a business owner and get tips on how to engage in your business in a way that is sustainable for you. You will realise that you're not alone in the ways that you struggle, because at times we all do. And I'm happy to share with you what I've learned through my own struggles and my experiences of running businesses. You can join me as I chat to wonderful guests and have your curiosity piqued about various topics. And I'll also bring you solo bite-sized business episodes that can easily fit into your day. This is a place to remember that you are human first and have different tasks in your business and different roles in your life that need your attention. And for that, you need to take care of yourself in the best way you can. This is a place of nourishment, growth, and helpful information. A place where you can learn ways to assist you and your business to thrive. Because remember, if you thrive, your business will too. Now let's get to the episode. Hi, and welcome to another episode and another wonderful guest. I feel so fortunate to be able to share the wisdom of such great guests with you. And I know this is an episode you're going to really want to pay attention to. So grab your cuppa or put on your walking shoes and join me as I introduce today's guest. Dr. Kristy Goodwin is an award-winning digital well-being and productivity expert. She powers up performance by decoding the neurobiology of peak performance in the digitally intense world we now work and live in. Dr. Kristy shares practical brain-based solutions to help high achievers optimize their performance so they don't have to pay the success tax, where their success comes at the cost of their physical health, mental well-being, and/or relationships. So you can see why I wanted to get her onto the podcast. She uses cutting-edge science and neurotechnology to power up performers so people can live high-res lives at work and beyond. Dr. Kristy's peak performance protocols play a critical role in the modern workplace to enhance efficiency, drive productivity, and facilitate innovation without having to sacrifice well-being. Kristy is a certified speaker professional. In 2023, she was the recipient of the Australian Professional Speakers Association Breakthrough Speaker of the Year Award, and she is the author of the award-winning book, Dear Digital, We Need to Talk. It is my absolute pleasure to welcome Dr. Kristy to the podcast. Hi, Kristy. Thank you so much for joining me.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me. And what a great example of technology enabling us to do things that would otherwise be challenging or perhaps even inconceivable.
Yeah, so it certainly has its benefits, doesn't it? But we really need to think about how we're using it so that we don't have the negative consequences that we'll talk a bit more about. Could you tell us a little bit about your background and what led you to writing the Dear Digital, We Need to Talk book?
So I initially started my career as an educator and then did a PhD that looked at the impact of technology on what I colloquially refer to as screenagers, i.e. kids and teenagers. And my research and speaking was often around that space of the impact of digitalised childhoods and adolescence on our children and their developing brains and bodies. But it was often parents who would come up at the end of the parent seminar or health professionals saying, look, I know that session was all about kids and teens, but I'm recognising that my digital habits and behaviours are having a profound impact on my productivity, on my well-being, on my focus. And so my work started to expand into working with how all of us, how humans can either be powered up or powered down by our digital habits and behaviours. And it was actually the impetus for writing the book was that I had a really serious health issue at the height of the pandemic, like many people. I contracted COVID. Now, as a fit, vaccinated woman in her 40s, I thought that it would be a relatively minor health incident. I had plans of binge watching Netflix and my husband delivering me chicken soup in bed, neither of which took place. Instead, what happened was that I became so sick with COVID. I had repeated uncontrollable seizures, and one Wednesday morning, our dog found me on the floor adjacent to our bed convulsing. I was rushed to a code red emergency ward and hooked up to a ventilator, unable to breathe. And for years, my body had been whispering to me, slow down, work in a more sustainable pace. But instead, I adopted the Codral advice that was made popular in the 1980s, and I just soldiered on.
Yeah.
And years of chronic stress, even though my body had been whispering to me, the years of chronic stress caught up with me. And I was so sick with COVID that I was literally in that code red emergency ward. And so I had been living and working in a way that was completely incompatible with what I call our human operating system, the way our brains and bodies are designed. And, I was working, as I think many people are, if we're really honest, in a frantic, frenetic and frazzled way. And these work habits and ways of living were completely incompatible with this HOS, the human operating system. Even though I spoke about this, even though I researched this, I was no better. I wasn't walking the walk.
I think so many of us have these stories, don't we, of not listening to the whispers until it is too late, and also that we know it and we've learnt it and we teach it and we don't listen to it.
Because I thought I could outperform my biological brain. I thought I could outsmart it. I could hustle my way to success. And so I almost paid the ultimate success tax. I lay in the hospital bed, and through the paper petition curtain separating myself and the lady next to me, I heard the woman next to me literally take the final breaths of her life. And I was forced to confront my own possible mortality. And I had to confront the very ugly truth, the reality that I didn't want to look at. And that is that I was not living in ways that were compatible with my HOS, my human operating system. And so I made a pledge to myself that if I was able to leave that hospital, that I would no longer pay the success tax. I was no longer willing to compromise my physical health, my mental well-being, my relationships, all in the pursuit of success. And so back to my roots in terms of what do we know from neuroscience? What do we know from psychology about what I call sustainable peak performance? How can we work and live in harmony with our human operating system? And so I tried to course correct very entrenched behaviours, and I made radical shifts over time. I often in the book, I talk about this concept of micro habits, and it's based on the principle that big doors swing on small hinges. It was not about doing a radical 360 rotation of my life. It was just about making small incremental changes. And those small incremental changes amassed into completely transforming my life. And I went from being this powered down, burnt out version. The reason I was so sick with COVID, the only medical explanation that the doctors came up with was that I was burnt out.
You were burnt out,
Totally burnt out. The years of chronic stress caught up with me. And so I left that hospital saying that if I can, leave this, I'm on a mission to power up my performance, but to do so in a way that's sustainable. And I knew that the only way to do that was to work with that human operating system. So that implored me to write the book and do the work that I'm now doing. So I don't want anyone else being stuck in a hospital ward or facing a really serious health or life issue and regretting the decisions that they've made along the way.
Yeah, gosh, we're so aligned in our thinking there. I had a very severe burnout led to chronic illness. And again, you have to reinvent how you're living your life, don't you? And like you say, it can't be just a big, massive shift, because that in itself is not sustainable. It has to be, what am I adding in? What am I putting down? What are the small steps I can take? Because I think once you've been there, I mean, there's so many of us that have a similar story in not listening to ourselves and then ending up in these really negative consequences. But once you've been there, it's like, I am not going back there. There is nothing worth it in this world to put me back in that place. I speak to people and say, burnout nearly took everything from me, my health, my income, my relationships. And that's why I'm so passionate about the work I do as well. Now, in the book, you talk about, and I love this, that it's not just about doing a digital detox. We all know we're on digital stuff too much. Like, if anybody isn't, then congratulations. But I think we all know that most of us have some areas where we could put it down or do it differently. But I love that you talk about, this isn't about digital detox, because that doesn't change habits, does it? That just puts things on pause, and then we go back to how we did things. So can you speak a little bit more to that?
So often with any type of detox, a digital detox, a juice detox, what we find inevitably is that it creates a binge and a purge cycle. So I go offline for 3 days, but I come back on Tuesday morning to a bulging inbox, 281 Teams chats, and I'm frantically trying to triage those. The research on digital detoxes also tells us that they aren't effective long-term. They don't create the long-term behavioural change. So I believe we need to start to learn how can we take back control? How can we use technology? So it's not about digital amputation, because that doesn't work in 2024 and beyond, where technology plays an absolutely integral role in our lives, professionally and personally. But it's about saying, how can we intentionally, how can we use technology so we're not a slave to the screen? How can we use technology in ways that are congruent with how we are designed as humans? And so what we know is that the detoxing doesn't work. In fact, a study looked at a group of people who did a digital detox, and they had another group who just cut down their social media use by an hour a day. And they did some pre and post intervention measures. And what they overwhelmingly found was that 3 months after the study had concluded, the group that had done the detox had inadvertently reverted back to their pre-intervention habits. They basically crept back in. However, the group that simply reduced the amount of time they were spending on social media, didn't cut it out completely, had consistently stuck to a much more reduced amount of time they were spending online. So I think it speaks volumes about the fact that the detox doesn't work. It's about harmonizing our digital habits so that they serve us, not enslave us.
Yeah, I think it's kind of shifting away from that all or nothing thinking, isn't it? It's like we've got to find ways, and you speak to this, and I think that this is where I feel very aligned with the sort of work that you're doing. You speak about the human operating system, and I speak with people about, we really need to get to know ourselves well as the human being that we are. And obviously we have similarities as humans, but we also have the unique ways that we want to or have to operate in the world. And we need to pay attention to that so that we can have something that works for us and that works long term. Otherwise, we just keep going. It's like with everything, like you said, it's not just digital, it's all aspects of life. We can just jump from quick fix to quick fix to quick fix, which actually doesn't fix anything, does it?
No, and doesn't create the long-term behavioural change. I mean, the harsh reality is whether you love technology or you loathe it, or perhaps you sit somewhere in between, or perhaps you oscillate from hour to hour, depending on the size or the messages that are flashing on your screen. The reality is technology is here to stay. It's bad phase. It is going to continue to play a really integral role in our lives. How can we learn to live with it? How can we learn to leverage it so it supports us rather than stifles us? And that's where I think having that neurobiological understanding really helps. You know, as humans, I often say we're really not that complicated. We have certainly overcomplicated our lives. But what do we need as humans? What are my psychological and physical needs? How do I best operate as a human? And that's what we call our biological blueprint. Regardless of your IQ, your EQ, your physical prowess, there are some biological constraints we have. And, you know, like we're not designed to be multitasking, yet many of us spend hours a day. We're not designed to be spending hour upon hour with our eyes on a very small surface area like they are on our desktops and laptops. We're designed for our vision to be dilated, our eyes to be dilated. So there are some digital habits that are really incompatible with how we are designed, and it's about just shifting those. So the experience, we're living in a world, I think, where people are always on, rarely focused, and never recovered. That's not how we're trying to operate.
We were talking before we hit record, hey, about this isn't going away. Like, this is just the start of it. Like you said, you wrote the book prior to AI starting to become more prevalent. So this stuff is going to be in our lives more and more and more, and we need to develop healthy and helpful habits so that we can live with technology in a way that isn't harmful to us. So you talk a lot about some of these habits. Can you, well, I guess talking about what are some of the risks if we don't actually stop and take stock and say, this is what's happening. I know we kind of touched on the burnout, but what are some of the other risks that you see if we don't do that? And then perhaps let's talk about what are some of the benefits if we do change this relationship with digital.
Sure. So we know that our digital habits and behaviours are having a profound impact on our stress. So global rates, as you alluded to, of burnout and stress are at, very elevated levels. And I think this speaks to the fact, I call it the silent stress epidemic. Yeah. I believe that our screen habits are one of the chief. They're certainly not the only contributing factor. There are significant global events, economic challenges facing many people throughout the world. But I think we're often oblivious to some of the very pervasive but subtle ways that technology can make us feel stressed. Yeah. So, for example, I mentioned, the dilated gaze, and we're spending hours on a very fixed surface area. We also know that when we look at a screen, we do not sigh anywhere near as much. Now, as humans, one of the beautiful biological mechanisms that we have built into our biology is that when we're awake, we naturally should sigh roughly every 5 minutes. It's a natural mechanism to regulate our oxygen and carbon dioxide levels. 2 inhalations through our nose, and we exhale through our mouth. However, when we have that fixed narrow gaze on our screens, we don't sigh anywhere near as much.
It's incredible, right?
There's a condition that has been studied called email apnea, where we hold our breath when we go into our inbox, we dump some cortisol, our heart rate spikes, our pupils dilate, we have a physiological response. So technology is certainly making us stressed. Back-to-back virtual meetings, we've got brain scans actually showing us what we all intuitively know and experience. Teams or Zoom meetings or WebEx meetings are stressful and exhausting. Yeah. It's definitely impacting our stress and burnout in ways. It's also impacting our sleep. We know that our tech habits are having a huge impact on interpersonal relationships. Impact on our vision. We've seen rates of myopia, which is nearsightedness, increase rapidly over the last few years amongst children, teens, and adults alike. And one of the popular misconceptions is that it's too much close work. Now, that can potentially be a causal effect. But what we also know is that it's what our excessive time on screens is displacing. Time in sunlight, natural sunlight. We know, and we're not quite sure what the mechanism is it that when we're out in the sunlight, we tend to look at things in the distance, so we develop that depth of vision? Or is it that the sunlight helps to elongate our optic nerve? We're not really quite sure yet what the real mechanism is. But our tech habits are having a profound impact on so many parts, on our musculoskeletal health. Physiotherapists and a whole range of allied health professionals are treating increasing, musculoskeletal related issues. We know often mental health issues can be exacerbated, not necessarily caused. Speculation in the research about whether social media and screen use causes poor mental health. We know there's a strong correlation. But there are certain things that I think, I often say there's not many parts of our life that have not been touched by digital transformation. And so the impact is across the board in so many parts of our lives.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And you cover some really lovely habits in the book about how we can kind of counteract some of that. And just when you were talking, it's like, can we kind of get outside, or at least look outside, or even just look up from your desk across an office room if you're in an office, so that we aren't just staring at the same place. And we can sit for so long. We're not designed to just sit for hours on end, are we? And how can we actually take care of our physical bodies if we need to be for long periods of time? Or can we shorten our meetings with people? There's lots of things that we can look at. And I highly recommend your book. It's an easy read as well. I've become somebody who, if I'm reading a book, I do like it to be an easy read now. And yours is a really easy book to read. So that's great. Well done, you.
Thank you. And the reason I wrote it the way that it is, in just small little digestible habits, is because we know our attention spans are shrinking. I often say the super skill of the 21st century, the skill that trumps our IQ and our EQ. I'm not saying they're not important, but the super skill of the 21st century that every human, irrespective of their age, gender, geographic location, is their FQ, their focus quotient.
Yeah.
Our capacity to focus and sustain our focus in a world that's been deliberately engineered to be distracting and disruptive will be a universal skill, and it's a skill under threat. We see it time and time again. People pull up at traffic lights and are checking devices. People order their coffee and they pull out their devices. A lift, and so that obviously has a huge impact on our capacity to focus and direct that FQ skill.
Yeah, absolutely. So you talk about digital boundaries. Talk to me about that.
Yes. So look, technology has crept into every crevice of our lives, and we have to put up some borders and boundaries so that and I do work with teams. One of the things I help teams to create are what I call their digital guardrails. Now, across the globe, countries are in various stages and various iterations of implementing legislation around the right to disconnect. I think this has to be complemented regardless of whether your country has this legislation in place or not. We have to create digital guardrails. These are your digital norms and behaviours and protocols. I often colloquially call these your tech expectations. How responsive do you expect your team to be to internal emails? Do you have an after-hours communication escalation plan so that if there is an time-sensitive critical issue, how will that be disseminated? At a personal level, we need to create those borders and boundaries because we are not designed to be always on. We just, it's working against our neurobiology. I often explain to people that the prefrontal cortex, the part of our brain that does all our heavy lifting and our thinking, our prefrontal cortex only has a 4 to 6 hour battery life per day. So consistently pumping out, I know there are situations that demand extra hours sometimes, but if you're consistently working 12 and 14 hour days, you are working against the way you are designed. Some boundaries personally, we need at the team level these digital guardrails, and we need organisations to have some parameters too. But determining, where do I want to use devices? I often recommend creating a landing zone in your house. Where do phones go during meal times, or if you don't want to be taking them into the bedroom? Actually taking the time, when do you want to switch off? What are your parameters around responding to emails after hours or on holidays? We know research tells us many people are avoiding. I've done a lot of work in the last couple of years with companies saying we need you to remind people they need to take their annual leave because liability on their books, but people are shying away from their leave because they don't want to come back to a bulging inbox or to the barrage of messages. So,
and we don't reward this, do we, in society? We don't reward people taking breaks and resting. A lot of the people listening to the podcast are business owners and maybe small business. And I think, that this working long hours and posting on social media that you're on the beach with your laptop, it's glamorized. And what we need to be glamorizing is, just laying down and doing nothing and recognizing that actually allowing ourselves to rest and restore is so important, but it's just not rewarded. I mean, I think there's a number of us kind of working in this kind of space of trying to shift the narrative. But it's hard, isn't it? Because people are seeing that colleagues do better or somebody's business seems more successful because they're working harder. I mean, I was excited to see the legislation come through about the changes in Australia about not being able to contact staff after hours.
Yeah. Look, I firmly believe there are certainly well-being benefits of working the way we're designed. We are biologically designed for effort and recovery. Just like you wouldn't get on a treadmill at the gym and run at level speed 22 for the entire time. You might do a quick sprint and then you would recover. Quick recover. We are designed to work that way. And so there are definitely well-being perspectives, but I also encourage people, and I know this is often a challenge for high performers, entrepreneurs, small business owners, because we have become conditioned to thinking that more is more. The more hours in, the more results I will get. And that's often, I think, an industrialized model of productivity.
Absolutely.
I think what we need to remember is that rest is absolutely integral to sustainable peak performance.
Yeah.
I often ask people, where were you? What were you doing when you came up with your last brilliant idea?
Yeah.
Where were you when you solved a really complex problem? And I have never, in the thousands of people I've asked this to, never ever had one person say to me it was in an Excel spreadsheet. It was
in the middle of a meeting when I was feeling really stressed.
It is universally most of the time in the shower.
In the shower.
When I was driving, when I was going for a walk, when I was on holidays and there was no Wi-Fi. And so the neuroscience behind this is when we let our minds, we used to call it daydreaming.
Yeah.
When we let our minds meander, it's called the default mode network.
Yeah.
This is when ideas germinate. So if you want to perform, as I'm imagining your listeners do, if you want to perform not only at a sustainable level, but if you want creative, productive, innovative ideas to germinate, you've got to have white space. You've got to have, you can call it boredom. And I worked with a CEO a couple of years ago in a coaching capacity, and he understood the scientific merits of this default mode network. But he said, Kristy, my EA will think I am very unprofessional if I block out times in my calendar called daydreaming. He said it just won't cut it. It will look, and could have a very negative effect on the team. So he said, I'm going to block out this time because I can see what you're saying and why it might be so important. But instead, what I'm going to call it is activation of default mode network time. He said it sounds very fancy, and let's face it was semantics.
Yeah, exactly. It's the same thing, but it sounds better for the context he was in.
What resulted is that by blocking out that time, and it had to move around in his calendar, it wasn't sort of a hard fixed time. But what he came back to me and reported was that protecting that time ended up with him creating an idea that generated millions of dollars in revenue. Yeah. He knows, had he not fiercely protected that time, if he just kept pushing on and not having that percolation time, that mind-wandering time, that idea never would have come to light. So I think if we can shift it from, it's not just something that's a nice to have, that it's a well-being and a performance imperative.
Absolutely. It's so essential, isn't it? I have, I colour code in my phone diary, and I use yellow for self-care because when I look at it, it just feels more joyous. And I make sure that there's some yellow in my diary every day, and I will look to the next week. And if there's not yellow, then I make a point of putting yellow in there. And I talk with people I work with around this because we have to be intentional with it, don't we? We can't just assume it's going to happen, because for many people, and particularly I would say for women, without generalizing too much, but we can tend to be very other focused, people pleasing. I work with a lot of helping professionals, and that can be a lot of the time about focusing on other people. So we need to be intentional. Otherwise, the day's gone by and you haven't done it. The week's gone by and you haven't done it. So like you were working with that corporate person about putting it in the diary, I think it's important for all of us, no matter what the context of our life is, that we are very deliberate and intentional about this.
And I love that you colour code it, because that's a very quick, tangible indicator as to whether we've got enough of that yellow in our calendar.
What decreases my cognitive load when I'm looking at my diary? It's like, is there yellow or is there not yellow?
Absolutely. And also, we live and die by our calendars these days. So if we don't put it in there, we fill that space up with another meeting, or we allow other people, our colleagues or clients to fill that space up. And I wanted to circle back to what you said. We have a very, very pronounced gender wellbeing gap. Study after study is telling us that concerningly more females than males are experiencing stress and burnout. And there is certainly a biological component. There is certainly a hormonal component to that. But we also know there are some other extraneous variables that mean women are much more prone to this. So it's something, regardless of whether you are male or female, we need to be cognizant of this and look at how do we remedy this? How do we address this? Because I am having so many conversations across the globe with high-performing women who are experiencing this, but many times suffering in silence, thinking that this is fundamentally flawed or wrong with them. For years, we got told to lean in, and then we were told to lean out. The reality is we just all wanted to lay down.
It's heartbreaking, isn't it? Because so many people are suffering in silence.
Yep.
And also, I think some of the stuff that happens, and I can find quite frustrating, is this minimization of burnout, where people, like with many things, people are just say, "Oh, I'm a bit tired, I'm feeling burnt out," and maybe they actually just haven't had a very good night's sleep, and otherwise they're feeling okay. And we need to stop doing that, because burnout is such a significant and damaging thing. And as with everything, when we minimize it, people don't think, well, actually, I do need to reach out and get some help for this. I do need to make some major changes so that they don't end up really sick, end up in hospital like yourself. You know, too many of us have got these stories of life kind of collapsing.
Yeah.
And having to rebuild. And for me, it's really, I really want to work in this kind of burnout prevention space rather than burnout recovery, because burnout recovery is expensive and takes a really long time. So adding these aspects, this is why I wanted to get you on the podcast, because this digital context is so invasive in our life. We need to pay attention to it, because it's such an important part of how we live. And like you say, it's going to get worse, not better.
Yeah. No, I agree. Invasive and invisible came to mind when you were saying, habits have crept in and we've never really evaluated, is this serving me? Is this enslaving me? Is this helping me, or is this harming me? And I think we're at a really interesting juncture in time where we are, it saddens me. I agree. Burnout has become almost a throwaway term, or just a part of our vernacular. The other worrying trend that I'm seeing with some of the corporate teams I'm working with is that people have almost normalized stress, exhaustion, and burnout. It's just, it's a part of working in the modern 21st century, and that's not the case. Like, that is
no way.
How we are designed. That's not going to get sustainable peak performance. That's not going to get, Deloitte have recently released a paper about human performance and human capital. And if we are going to live in a world where, a significant proportion of the population are knowledge workers, how do we optimize the humans? And I think this is why we really have to shift that conversation, and we have to stop normalizing burnout. We need clear parameters on what it is, and so acknowledging it's not a baseline for human existence.
No, not at all. Because if we take care of humans, and whether this is in organizations or for many of the listeners, if this is about your own business, like, taking care of you is taking care of business. It's like you say, you'll be more creative, you can be more productive in the time that you're meant to actually be having these bursts of working. Yeah. If you were to think about 2 or 3 kind of tips for somebody, if they're sort of thinking, oh yeah, this is resonating a lot and I use my phone too much and I'm on back-to-back meetings, I'm doing all the things, what would be 2 or 3 things that you'd say, look, why don't you kind of consider starting here?
Absolutely. So I say there's 3 pillars of powered up performance. If you want to thrive in the digitally demanding world, the 3 pillars that will set you up for success and sustainable success. 1, I believe we have to build a fortress around our focus. So a really simple micro habit: when you want to get your deep focused work done, put your phone somewhere where you can't see it. Research from the University of Austin, Texas tells us that even if our phone is on silent and face down, if it's in our line of sight, it drops our cognitive performance by an estimated 7 to 10%.
Wow, that's huge, hey?
Huge. Looking at having your phone nearby makes you 7 to 10% dumber. I can't be any more direct. It's literally a brain drain, because we're offloading some of our cognitive resources. We know when we are distracted, it does not matter if it's the ping of a notification, whether it's chatty Kathy coming up to our desk in the office, whether it's a ruminating thought, regardless of how we are distracted, research tells us that it takes the average adult 23 minutes and 15 seconds to get back into their deep focus state. It's called the resumption lag. So being able to minimize distractions and to focus when we need to is absolutely critical. So that's the first pillar. Yeah. So really trying to optimize our focus. The second pillar is that we have to build our stress tolerance. Yeah. We are living in a world that will inevitably be stressful, but the good news is, as humans, we are biologically designed for stress. We are designed, however, for really short bursts, acute stress, and we are designed to complete or close out the stress cycle. And so one of the things that I often talk about is that we have to build our capacity to hold stress. And this is why there are so many scientific merits behind things like cold showers and ice baths. It is priming our body to deal with physical stress so that we are better equipped to deal with psychological stress. Other micro habits, things like vigorous physical activity, building our stress resilience. So when we do have back-to-back virtual meetings, because that's just the way our calendar looks that day, what can I do to regulate my stress cycle? Is it sighing? Research tells us 2 to 3 sigh cycles drops our stress response. Is it in your Teams meeting, literally closing your eyes? We know that when we're on virtual meetings, part of our brain, it's called the occipital lobe, and it processes what we're seeing. Another region called the fusiform gyrus, they're very active on Teams and Zoom meetings. Our brain fatigues. So simply closing your eyes for 30 seconds and just sit very still, make it look like your internet has dropped out momentarily, and close your eyes for 30 seconds.
I love that. Pretend you've frozen. But I think that's such a good point, though. And I talk to people about this, about having eyes closed time, because we don't realize how much stimuli we take in merely just being in a room doing nothing. Our eyes are taking in so much stimuli, right?
Huge amount. And we've actually, roughly quantified. So we know the human brain is processing 11 million bits of sensory data per second. Our brains are literally supercomputers. What we are estimating is that 10 million of those come through our eyes. So having a browser with 28 tabs open, having your phone nearby with a red notification saying you've got 88 unread messages, that is all really taxing. Having a really space, all of those things are exhausting. So building our focus is really important. Putting your phone out of sight. Figuring out what is your prime time. This is what we call your chronotype, and biologically we are most focused and alert during certain times of the day. We're either early birds, we're either sort of middle birds, or we're late night owls. And your job is to build a fortress around your focus during your most productive hours, where you can. Turning off notifications, putting your phone out of sight, blocking that time out for deep work. So that's the second pillar. The third pillar for sustainable success is that we have to reframe recovery. We have to make sure that we see recovery and rest as a right and a responsibility. It's not a reward. It's not frivolous. It's not excessive. It's not something we save up and do on our annual leave. It's something, and the research, a study has only come out in the last week or so, corroborating that the best type of break to tackle burnout, we'd all love it to be annual leave and to say we need to have unlimited annual leave, but the research actually tells us it's micro breaks.
Absolutely.
Flow breaks. Those studies actually saying a minimum of 10 minutes. 10 minutes interspersed throughout your day several times, we know is enough to help optimal performance and well-being.
And this is the thing, isn't it? I mean, people have so many complex beliefs around resting and slowing down. And it's so important to work through those, because ultimately it's not huge. I mean, if you allowed yourself to stop and do a bit of down-regulating breathing, or to just, even if you can't get outside, to just go and just walk around somewhere away from your desk. And if you're doing these things throughout the day, you're taking care of yourself on a daily basis, rather than I'll take care of myself when everything else is finished and I've got some time for a holiday. And then you talk to people who say, I've got so much holiday accrued. It's like, why? It's holiday. Go take it. Enjoy it.
The other thing I hear, very common pattern with a lot of the clients I work with, is that they get to their annual leave and they're so exhausted and depleted. The first few days are spent with a migraine, sick. And that's not how we're designed to function and live as humans.
No.
And I agree. This is something that, and they actually call it the recovery paradox. And it is this concept that the people who need the most recovery tend to be the people who take the least amount.
Take the least.
And
when I work with people around the self-care, it's like when you need it the most, you do it the least. But you've got to do it, and you've got to do it consistently. And it doesn't have to be huge, right? Because I think people, when they are already tired or they are busy and have a lot on their plate, it's like, not another thing. And it's like, closing your eyes and taking 10 breaths is going to take no time at all and is going to help nourish your nervous system.
Yeah. And that's with the high performers I work with. I agree. It's a huge quantum leap in their thinking, especially if it's an embedded habit and trait that they've carried throughout their lifetime. And that's why I'm a huge advocate for using wearable devices. I'm working with a number of clients. And we are using wearable devices so that they can track the impact on their own biometric data.
Yeah.
So, for example, the clients I work with, we're measuring their stress in real time. There's a tool we're using, and you've got a stress monitor. Now, no one who's stressed needs an app telling them that they're stressed.
No. But it can be good data to see it right in front of you, can't it?
And start to see it in terms of time. Oh, wow, I had no idea that meeting with my colleague was so stressful. Oh, wow, stress really peaks around 3 to 5 p.m. What do I tend to be doing then? But more importantly, we can look at what protocols, what are the little micro habits we can put in place that bring us back to a stress baseline, and what is the impact? We know that a huge impact in terms of people's sleep, and we've got concerning data that globally people are not getting enough or good quality of sleep. And what we know is that unresolved daytime stress has a huge impact on the quality and quantity of sleep at night. So we can start to look for correlations in their behaviors and track what are the impact of some of these little micro habits on our biometric data, because our body does not lie and our body keeps score.
Yeah, absolutely.
See, and this is one of the problems with any sort of habit change, is that habit change is often invisible and incremental. And so we often don't see the cumulative benefits of what's resulting from the little micro habits we're implementing. But with biometric data and wearable devices, you can see, wow, my performance skyrockets when I get that 7 hours of sleep. What did I do as a precursor to help me get that 7 hours? I stopped eating a couple of hours before I went to bed. I had a wind down routine. I took breaks throughout the day. And so we can start to bake in and confirm, and this is the data scientist in me coming out, we can start to corroborate, what does the data actually tell us? We can make data informed decisions.
Absolutely. I have a wearable. This is not sponsored, but I wear an Aura ring, and I found that really helpful in terms of my sleep and sometimes changing what I do with that. But also what's been lovely for me is often when I've had a time where I'm working and I check my data later, a lot of the work I do has me in the relaxed and engaged phase. They have like restored, relaxed, engaged, and stressed. And that just brings a smile to my face now, because I've created my business in a way that I'm doing stuff that I really love, I feel passionate and engaged about, excited about. And I spend a lot of time resting in between appointments. Even this morning, I knew I had a busier day than normal. So for me, I think about it in terms of front-loading self-care and what are the things that I'm going to do so that I'm taking care of myself on the busier days, more so than days I'm not so busy. But it's lovely to see the data. And then if it changes for me, I can be like, okay, let's reflect on what was different about that day and what have I let go of, or what do I need to add a bit more in? So the digital stuff can be really helpful.
Absolutely.
It's amazing. You and I chatting on this and doing the podcast. I mean, we couldn't do this if we didn't have the digital technology.
Totally agree. Yeah. And we need to leverage it. Like, I think and I hope this hasn't come across in any way as an anti-tech. It's not about, abdicating our digital habits. It's not about digital abstinence. It's about, can I harmonize? How can I find congruence between these digital habits and behaviors so that they help me not harm me? How can I use them in a way that so that I can leverage the benefits they offer without having to endure the pitfalls that they can also present if I'm not using them the right way or excessively?
Yeah. And your book, again, doesn't come through as anti-tech at all. I think it's a really easy to digest, easy read, full of information that can just be really helpful in getting people started on this path of how do I want my relationship with my digital world to be different so that I can use it to benefit me, not to have me stressed out all the time.
I'm sure there will be bits of it in there that are confronting for people because, like anything, we see stuff and go, "Oh, do that a bit much." But it's wonderful. I'm curious as to what you learned perhaps about yourself during writing that book.
Yeah, so I'll be honest, I had an insane deadline that I agreed to with the publisher. It wasn't the publisher enforcing it on me. And I could see towards the end of the writing process that I was reverting back to some unhealthy, unhelpful behaviours. And I could feel burnout approaching. And, given that I'd made that pledge that I was never going to go back to that way of living and working, I had to have some confronting, uncomfortable conversations with myself.
Yeah.
And I managed to course correct. Now, years ago, Kristy would have kept pushing on. She would have ignored those whispers, and I could hear the whispers in my body. And so I learned a lot, not just about the ideas presented in the book, about how do I tune in, how do I work in a sustainable way. And I'm really proud to say I managed to submit the book by the agreed date with the publisher for the submission, but I did so in a way that didn't compromise my health and well-being. And that is something I'm incredibly proud of. I think it speaks volumes. If I could do that by applying these, very simple brain-based protocols, they work. As someone who's a neuroscientist, I love to be able to say that this is baked in science or backed by science, perhaps baked by as well, but backed by science. And, if we work the way we are designed, because we're not complicated as humans, if we work with our human operating system, we will thrive. The reason that so many of us are powered down, burnt out, living, I often call it as a low-res version of ourselves, because we are living incompatibly with how we are designed to as humans.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sometimes when we start to veer off course after we've been through something like that and we can course correct, I think it can be really great that we veered off course, because it shows us actually when I do tune in and listen and I recognise that I have learnt new skills and I have a new way of doing things and it's worked and I'm not on this path to burnout now, I think it can be really, really valuable. Hey.
And also having loving friends and family who gently, and this is why I love the idea of guardrails, they just sort of bump you back in when you're veering off the wrong path. And I think we need to remember, just this week, I reached out to a friend. I knew she was not doing particularly well. And her response I think it actually saddened me. She said, "Thank you for taking the time to care enough to reach out." And so I think we need to remember, even if it is just, and I will say it was literally just a text message. We've since had a phone call and we're meeting for a walk in the coming weeks. But taking the time when you see someone else who you are concerned may not be, perhaps they are going down that path of burnout or perhaps aren't doing right, don't be afraid to reach out. I think we've become accustomed to a world where we are in this frantic, frenetic and frazzled way that we've forgotten the value and the importance of simple human connection, like striking up the conversation while you wait for your coffee with someone. Just a smile at someone. I'm worried in a world where we are more connected than ever, that we are slowly becoming more disconnected. And that is a terrible fear.
So instead of getting your phone out in the queue, maybe speak to another human being that's in the queue. And then if you're not with other people, use this wonderful technology, like you say, to reach out and connect with somebody that you might otherwise not be able to connect with. Because there are such beautiful, as we keep saying, there's such beautiful aspects to this. I've got friends all over the world that I can connect with and talk to as if we're just sitting in the same room. I mean, that's marvellous. But we need to do it in a way that is aligned with who we are as human beings, hey, and what's going to work for us individually. My next question I ask to all my guests, I'm always curious about the answer on this one. If you could meet your 80-year-old self today, what do you think she would say to you?
Oh, what would she say? Oh, I often live by this mantra, prioritize the potent and live in close proximity to your values. That to me is the ultimate success. And I've had enough life experience where I haven't done those things. And I think we need to remember those things. That to me is true success, really living in close proximity to your values.
Yeah.
So I think we need to take the time to know what those values are and fiercely protect them, and not let the digital world dupe you into thinking what your values might be, or divert you from what are your deep values yourself.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. I'm sure she would be very thankful that you have adopted that in your life and live accordingly. That's really lovely. Yeah. It's been an absolute pleasure. I'm sure people will get a lot from this episode. I highly recommend they go and buy your book. We'll put some links in the show notes so that they can know where to find that and where to find out more information about yourself. But thank you again for coming on. It's been really great.
It's a pleasure, and thank you for having me, Hayley.
Thank you for sharing this time with me today. I hope our time together has been helpful and supportive. If there has been something in this episode that you have found helpful, I invite you to share it with another person you think might benefit. If you've benefited in any way from the podcast, please do me a favour and show my pod some love by giving it a 5-star rating and review. Ratings, reviews and shares really help to increase awareness and reach of the podcast, allowing this helpful information to be spread more widely. All reviews are welcome and much appreciated. And if you do share on socials, remember to tag me so I can see who's listening, because you never really know over here in podcast land, and I can reach out personally to say thank you. If you'd like to be notified when the next episode airs, please use the link in the show notes to join our mailing list. If you have any particular topics you'd like to learn more about, or guests you'd like to hear from, please reach out and let me know. I'd love to hear from you. Music and editing by Nissa Ray. Thanks, Nissa. I wish you all well in your relationship with yourself and your business. May you go well and go gently. And remember, if you thrive, your business will too.